At 11:47 p.m. on September 7, 1940, Gunner Sergeant William "Billy" Thornton crouched beside his 3.7-inch QF anti-aircraft gun on the rooftop of a converted warehouse in East London, watching 23 Heinkel He-111 bombers approach through scattered cloud cover at 12,000 feet, close enough that he could see the exhaust trails glowing orange against the ink-black sky. His right hand rested on a modified predictor mechanism he'd built from salvaged clock parts, telescope lenses, and a bicycle chain, a contraption his battery commander had called junkyard nonsense 3 weeks earlier. The nearest RAF fighter patrol was 17 miles northeast over Essex, too far to intercept before the bombers reached their targets. In 45 seconds, those bombers would be directly overhead, and in 90 seconds, their payload would obliterate the civilian shelter 300 yards south where 260 people waited in darkness. What the officers who mocked Sergeant Thornton's improvised fire control system didn't understand was that mathematics and observation could defeat doctrine, and tonight, that understanding would save London. The scream of the air raid sirens had faded to a mechanical wheeze 7 minutes ago. Now there was only the distant rumble of aircraft engines, the metallic clicking of shell loaders preparing rounds, and the shallow breathing of gun crews who'd been awake for 31 hours straight. Thornton's hands moved across his contraption with the precision of a watchmaker, adjusting angles, calculating wind drift, compensating for the atmospheric pressure that had dropped 3 millibars in the last hour. The city below was a geometry of shadows and flame, the docks burning from the evening's first raid, the Thames reflecting firelight like molten copper, entire streets reduced to rubble producing dust clouds that rose like fog. "Sergeant, command says hold fire until they're at 8,000 feet, Lieutenant Reeves shouted from the ladder well, his voice tight with the authority of a man who'd spent more time in classrooms than combat. Standard doctrine, wait for optimal range. Thornton didn't turn around. His eye remained pressed against the optical sight of his improvised predictor, tracking the lead bomber's trajectory with movements so slight they seemed like tremors rather than adjustments. Sir, if we wait for 8,000 feet, they'll have dropped their payload and turned north before our shells reach altitude, he called back, his Liverpool accent thick with the matter-of-fact tone of someone explaining that water runs downhill. We need to fire at current range. 12,000 feet, adjusted for wind shear at 9,000. That's not possible, Sergeant, the manual clearly states. The manual was written by men who never had to shoot at something they couldn't touch, Thornton interrupted, then caught himself. Sir. A burst of laughter echoed from the gun position 20 yards west, another 3.7-inch battery manned by the Territorial Army lads from Surrey. Corporal Davies, their spotter, leaned over the sandbag wall with a grin that showed too many teeth. Oi, Thornton, you planning to knock down Jerry with your bicycle parts then? Maybe ring your little bell at him. More laughter. Even Thornton's own crew, Jenkins, O'Malley, and young Private Cooper, shifted uncomfortably, caught between loyalty and the weight of institutional skepticism. They'd seen Thornton's device work during practice runs, hitting target drones that other batteries missed by hundreds of yards. But practice wasn't combat. Practice didn't have consequences measured in civilian lives and burning buildings. Thornton had spent 13 years as a clock repairman in Liverpool before the war, fixing pocket watches and church tower mechanisms, understanding the relationship between gears and time, motion and prediction. When the conscription notice arrived in May 1939, he'd reported to the anti-aircraft training depot at Oswestry expecting to learn a trade. Instead, he discovered an institution trapped in the doctrine of the last war, using fire control tables calculated for slower aircraft flying predictable patterns. The Luftwaffe's bombers were faster, their pilots more aggressive, their approach angles inconsistent with any pre-war manual. The standard British anti-aircraft predictor, the Kerrison predictor, was a mechanical computer weighing over 200 pounds operated by a crew of 3 designed to calculate firing solutions based on aircraft speed, altitude, and bearing. It was brilliant engineering. It was also too slow. By the time the Kerrison produced a solution, enemy aircraft had already altered course, climbed, or descended. The predictor assumed aircraft flew straight and level. The Luftwaffe had not read that manual. Thornton had recognized the problem during his 3rd week of training. While other recruits memorized predictor operation procedures, he'd spent his evening hours in the depot's workshop, studying ballistics tables, aircraft recognition guides, atmospheric pressure charts. He'd noticed patterns, how certain wind conditions at ground level predicted wind shear at altitude, how bomber formations maintained specific spacing during night raids, How the angle of exhaust trails revealed acceleration or deceleration invisible to standard observation. His solution had been simple. Build a smaller, faster predictor using the same principles that governed clock movements, precisely calibrated gears translating observed motion into predicted position. He'd scavenged parts from damaged equipment, borrowed lenses from a broken theodolite, and spent 2 weeks in the depot machine shop assembling a device that fit in a wooden case the size of a suitcase. The instructors had been unimpressed. The examining officer had called it interesting but impractical. His battery commander, Major Whitmore, had permitted him to bring it to London as a personal project, with the clear implication that it would never be used in actual combat. That was August, this was September. London was burning and doctrine was a luxury reserved for peacetime. The Battle of Britain had entered its most desperate phase. For 29 consecutive nights, the Luftwaffe had bombed London. Civilian casualties exceeded 11,000. The RAF Fighter Command, stretched to operational limits, could not maintain continuous air cover over the city after dark. Night fighters were too few, their interception success rate too low. Ground-based anti-aircraft defenses had become the primary defense against night bombing raids. And those defenses were failing. British anti-aircraft artillery shot down an average of 1 enemy aircraft for every 30,000 shells fired. The mathematics were brutal. Each successful intercept cost approximately £150,000 in ammunition alone. More troubling, Luftwaffe bomber crews had begun to recognize the patterns of British anti-aircraft fire. They knew the standard firing solutions, the typical burst altitudes, the delay between visual acquisition and shell detonation. They'd adapted their approach patterns, varying altitude during the final run to target, diving or climbing in unpredictable intervals that rendered pre-calculated firing tables obsolete. The 127th Heavy Anti-Aircraft Battery, Thornton's unit, had fired 2,847 rounds since September 1st. They'd hit nothing. 0 confirmed kills. 0 probable. Their shooting record appeared in daily reports circulated to battery commanders across London, a constant reminder of inadequacy that Lieutenant Reeves felt personally and mentioned frequently. Commands threatening to relocate us to coast defense if we don't improve, Reeves had announced during morning parade on September 6th, standing before the assembled gun crews with the pained expression of a schoolmaster addressing disappointing students. They say we're wasting ammunition, wasting time. They say, he'd paused, clearly uncomfortable with the next phrase. They say we might as well be firing into empty sky for all the good we're doing. Thornton had said nothing. The other sergeants had said nothing. What was there to say? The lieutenant was reading a fact, not offering an opinion. The real problem, Thornton knew, wasn't the guns. The 3.7-inch QF anti-aircraft gun was mechanically sound, 12-foot barrel, 28-pound shell, theoretical effective ceiling of 25,000 feet. The problem was the fire control system, the human and mechanical process of pointing that barrel at the right piece of sky at the right moment. Current doctrine required visual acquisition of the target, measurement of bearing and altitude using optical instruments, input of that data into the kerosene predictor, calculation of firing solution, transmission of gun laying instructions to the crew, manual adjustment of elevation and traverse, and finally, pulling the lanyard to fire. That process took approximately 90 seconds, when performed by a competent crew under ideal conditions. Luftwaffe bombers covered 4.5 miles per minute at cruising speed. The mathematics explained everything. Thornton's improvised predictor eliminated steps. It combined observation, calculation, and gun laying into a continuous process rather than discrete stages. The operator, Thornton himself, maintained visual contact with the target through an optical sight mounted directly on the device. His hands adjusted a series of gears and levers that translated observed angular movement into predicted trajectory. Those mechanical outputs connected directly to the gun's elevation and traverse mechanisms through a system of cables and pulleys he'd rigged himself. The entire process, from target acquisition to firing solution, took approximately 12 seconds. Major Whitmore had watched a demonstration on August 28th. He'd stood with arms crossed while Thornton tracked a practice drone, calling out predicted positions that matched the drone's actual location with unsettling accuracy. When the demonstration ended, Whitmore had pursed his lips, adjusted his cap, and said, "Sergeant, in the Army we have procedures, we have manuals, we have proven systems developed by engineers with university educations. What we don't have is time for," he gestured at the device, "enthusiastic improvisation. Stick to the kerosene, that's an order." But Whitmore had also said, Keep your contraption, just don't use it when I'm watching. That was as close to permission as Thornton would receive. The evening had begun with intelligence reports indicating a major raid assembling over northern France. Luftwaffe radio traffic suggested at least 200 aircraft, bombers and fighters, preparing for an extended operation targeting London's dock facilities and civilian infrastructure. RAF Fighter Command scrambled every available Spitfire and Hurricane, establishing patrol patterns over Kent and Essex, waiting for the formation to cross the channel. The first wave arrived at sunset, 6:47 p.m., bombers streaming toward the docks in tight formations at high altitude. RAF fighters engaged over the Thames estuary, shooting down 9 bombers and damaging 17 more, but the majority reached their targets. Bombs fell on Silvertown, West Ham, Poplar. Fires erupted across East London, the flames visible from 20 miles away. Anti-aircraft batteries across the city opened fire. The sky filled with black bursts, shell fragments, tracer rounds from lighter guns. Crews loaded and fired in mechanical repetition, following procedures, trusting doctrine, hitting nothing. The 127th Battery fired 73 rounds during that first wave. Lieutenant Reeves called out targeting instructions from the kerosene predictor. Gunner teams adjusted elevation and traverse. Loaders rammed shells. The gun bucked and roared. Shells exploded at various altitudes, creating dark flowers against the evening sky, each one a small fortune of propellant and metal detonating harmlessly in empty air. Thornton had watched in silence, his improvised predictor sitting unused in its wooden case beside the ammunition pile. He'd tracked the bombers visually, calculating trajectories in his head, recognizing the patterns invisible to standard doctrine. How the formation leader signaled altitude changes with wing dips. How bombers accelerated slightly after releasing their payload. How the entire formation descended 300 feet during their turn away from target. At 9:15 p.m. the raid ended, the all-clear sounded. Crews collapsed beside their guns, exhausted, disappointed, angry. Cooper, the youngest member of Thornton's crew at 19 years old, had sat with his head in his hands. "We didn't hit anything," he'd said quietly. "All that noise and fire and we didn't hit bloody anything." Jenkins, the loader, had clapped him on the shoulder. "Nobody did, lad, nobody ever does. We're just here to scare 'em a bit, make 'em fly higher, that's what the lieutenant says." "That's bollocks," O'Malley, the traverse operator, had muttered. He was Irish, from Galway, with the thick hands of a dock worker and the temperament of someone who'd seen authority fail too often to trust it completely. "We could hit them if they'd let Billy use his device." "Orders are orders," Jenkins had replied, but without conviction. Thornton had said nothing. He'd walked to the roof edge, looking down at the burning docks, the fire crews struggling with inadequate water pressure, the ambulances collecting casualties. Somewhere in that darkness, people were dying because German bombers flew unmolested through anti-aircraft fire that couldn't touch them. At 11:30 p.m., the sirens had sounded again. The Luftwaffe's night bombing strategy relied on waves. The first wave struck at sunset, creating fires that marked targets for subsequent raids. The second wave, arriving hours later, used those fires as navigation beacons, requiring no flares or pathfinders. It was efficient, ruthless, and increasingly effective as British civil defense struggled to control the blazes from earlier raids. Thornton heard them before he saw them. The characteristic unsynchronized drone of Heinkel engines, slightly out of phase with each other, creating a wavering throb that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He grabbed his binoculars, scanning the sky northwest, toward Barking and Dagenham where the first wave's fires still burned. "There," he said, pointing. 23 aircraft, Heinkels, 12,000 feet, bearing 270, speed approximately 180 miles per hour. Lieutenant Reeves emerged from the observation post, struggling into his steel helmet. "Are you certain? I don't see." "Look for the exhaust glow against the cloud base," Thornton interrupted. "They're above the smoke layer, using the fires as navigation." Reeves raised his own binoculars. Several seconds passed. "Christ, you're right, sound the alarm." The battery came alive. Crews scrambled to their positions. The kerosene predictor team, 3 men under Corporal Harrison, rushed to their station, cranking handles, adjusting dials. The spotter on the western battery started shouting bearings and altitude estimates, most of them wrong. Thornton moved to his gun position. His crew followed Jenkins to the loader position, O'Malley to traverse, Cooper to elevation. They'd worked together for 3 months, knew each other's rhythms, trusted each other in the wordless way of small unit cohesion forged through repetition and shared hardship. "Sergeant, what are you doing?" Reeves called out. "Wait for firing instructions from the predictor." Thornton ignored him. He opened the wooden case containing his improvised device, the one Major Whitmore had forbidden him to use officially but had never actually confiscated. The brass gears gleamed in the firelight. The optical sight, scavenged from a surveying instrument, reflected orange flames. The system of cables and pulleys that connected his device to the gun's laying mechanisms had been carefully concealed beneath tarpaulins and equipment cases, installed over weeks of night shifts when officers were absent. "Billy," O'Malley said quietly, "if you use that thing and miss, they'll court-martial you." "If I don't use it and they hit the shelter, I'll court-martial myself," Thornton replied. His hands moved across the device, setting initial parameters: barometric pressure, wind direction at ground level, estimated wind shear based on cloud movement. "Besides, O'Malley, I won't miss." "How do you know?" "Because I understand how clocks work, and bombing runs are just complicated clocks. Everything's timing." Cooper laughed despite himself, a nervous sound that broke tension. Thornton pressed his eye against the optical sight, acquiring the lead bomber in his field of view. The device's crosshairs centered on the aircraft's nose. His right hand gripped a control wheel connected to a series of gears that calculated angular velocity. His left hand operated a lever that adjusted for altitude-based velocity changes. Both hands worked simultaneously, maintaining target track while the mechanical calculator predicted future position. The bombers approached in tight formation, a standard Luftwaffe pattern, lead aircraft flanked by two wingmen, two more elements of three aircraft each trailing behind. They maintained altitude discipline, no climbing or diving, confident in their safety. Why wouldn't they be? In 29 nights of raids, ground fire had posed minimal threat. "Sergeant, command orders you to wait for," Lieutenant Reeves began. "Sir, with respect, by the time your predictor generates a solution, those bombers will have dropped their payload and killed everyone in the shelter on Marshall Street," Thornton said, still tracking through his sight. "I need to fire now, at current range, 12,000 feet. "The manual says." "The manual's wrong, sir." Thornton's voice remained flat, factual. "It assumes aircraft behavior from 1918. These are 1940 aircraft flown by pilots who know our doctrine." "I can't authorize." "Then don't authorize it, sir. Court-martial me tomorrow. Tonight I'm taking the shot." Reeves fell silent. Thornton didn't know if that silence meant permission or simply the absence of prohibition. He didn't care. His entire world had narrowed to the crosshairs, the bomber's trajectory, the mechanical calculator clicking through its brass gears like an accelerated clock, predicting where that bomber would be in 17 seconds, the time required for a 3.7-inch shell to climb 12,000 feet. "Target acquired," Thornton called out. "Jenkins, load high explosive, fuse setting 87. Jenkins grabbed a shell from the ready rack, a 28-pound projectile with a time-delayed fuse. He set the fuse mechanism to 8.7 seconds, calculated to detonate at 12,000 feet, and loaded it into the breech. The block closed with a heavy metallic clang. "Loaded," Jenkins shouted. Thornton's hands continued tracking, adjusting. The bomber was now 2 degrees north of his crosshairs, descending slightly. Pilots often descended during final approach to improve accuracy. The predictor's gears compensated automatically, the gun's elevation dropping 3 degrees, traverse shifting 2 degrees east. The math was elegant. The bomber traveled at 180 miles per hour, 264 feet per second. In 17 seconds, it would travel 4,488 feet forward. But wind at altitude, estimated at 35 miles per hour from the northwest based on cloud drift, would push it approximately 270 feet south. Gravity would drop the shell approximately 90 feet below pure ballistic trajectory due to air resistance. The gun's muzzle velocity was 2,600 feet per second, but that decreased with altitude as air pressure dropped. Thornton's device calculated all of this mechanically, continuously, adjusting for changes in target behavior faster than any human team could operate the standard predictor. "On target," Thornton said, firing in 3 seconds. He watched the bomber cross his crosshairs, watched the predicted intercept point materialize in his mind, not where the aircraft was but where it would be. His right hand tightened on the firing lever. "Billy," the lieutenant said. Cooper began. "Fire," Thornton said and pulled the lever. The 3.7-inch gun roared. The entire rooftop shook. A tongue of flame 6 feet long erupted from the barrel, turning night into brief day. The shell, 28 pounds of metal and explosive, screamed skyward at 2,600 feet per second, leaving a faint tracer glow from its base-mounted chemical compound. For 17 seconds, nothing happened. The bombers continued their approach, serene and untouchable. The Western battery fired a volley, their shells detonating at 8,000 feet, 4,000 feet below the enemy formation. Black bursts bloomed harmlessly. Corporal Davies shouted something mocking that was lost in the gunfire. Lieutenant Reeves stood frozen, his face pale in the firelight, a man watching his career potentially end in real time. Thornton watched through his optical sight, tracking the lead bomber, his mechanical calculator still running, predicting, showing him exactly where his shell should arrive in 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. The shell detonated 50 feet ahead of the lead bomber at exactly 12,000 feet. The explosion was a white flash, a sphere of fragmentation, hundreds of steel shards expanding at supersonic velocity. The bomber flew directly into that expanding cloud of metal. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Heinkel's port engine erupted in flames, shrapnel shredding the cowling and severing fuel lines. The cockpit glass shattered. The starboard wing's leading edge punctured in 17 places, destroying lift characteristics. The aircraft dropped its nose, banking hard left, falling out of formation in a descending spiral, trailing fire and smoke. For 3 seconds, the rooftop was silent. Then Cooper screamed, "He hit it, bloody hell, he hit it." The bomber continued its death spiral, losing altitude rapidly, the engine fire spreading to the fuselage. At 8,000 feet, the crew bilayed out, 5 parachutes blossoming white against the dark sky. At 4,000 feet, the bomber exploded, probably from fire reaching the bomb bay. The detonation was enormous, a rolling orange fireball that lit the entire eastern sky, debris raining down toward the Thames. The remaining 22 bombers broke formation immediately. Their tactical discipline evaporated. Aircraft scattered in multiple directions, climbing, diving, turning, the neat 3 aircraft elements dissolving into individual survival. Several bombers dumped their payload prematurely, bombs falling into the river or onto empty industrial areas. The formation's cohesion, its primary defense against fighter attack and its bombing accuracy, disintegrated. "Load another shell," Thornton shouted, already tracking a second bomber, his predictor adjusting for the new target's erratic evasive maneuver. "Jenkins, move." Jenkins, still staring at the burning debris falling from the sky, snapped back to awareness. He grabbed another shell, set the fuse, rammed it home. Loaded. Thornton's hands worked the predictor, following a Heinkel that had climbed sharply to 14,000 feet, its pilot clearly panicking. The mathematical challenge was greater now. Increased altitude meant longer time to target, more opportunity for wind drift, more complex ballistic calculation. But the bomber was climbing predictably, its flight path smooth and straight, the pilot focused on altitude rather than evasion. On target firings. The gun roared again. 21 seconds later, the shell detonated 30 feet below the climbing bomber. Not a direct hit, but close enough. Shrapnel tore through the underside of the fuselage, shredding hydraulics, puncturing fuel tanks. The bomber leveled off, smoke pouring from its belly, then began a slow descent. It wouldn't make it back across the channel. 2 kills, 2 shells. The 127th Battery's shooting record had just improved from 0 in 2,847 rounds to 2 in 2 rounds, a success rate of 100%. The Western Battery had stopped firing. Corporal Davies stood on his rooftop, mouth open, staring. Even his crew had abandoned their positions, watching the impossible unfold. Lieutenant Reeves found his voice. "Sergeant, what, how?" "Predictive mathematics, sir," Thornton replied, tracking a third bomber. "Jenkins, load." The remaining 20 bombers fled north, abandoning their target run entirely. They dropped their payload randomly, bombs falling on empty fields, the river, one unfortunate cluster on a brewery that had been evacuated hours earlier. The raid was over. 23 bombers had approached. 2 were destroyed. The civilian shelter on Marshall Street remained intact, its 260 occupants unharmed. Word spread through the anti-aircraft network within minutes. Radio operators reported the kills to command. Spotters from neighboring batteries confirmed visual identification of 2 destroyed aircraft. Fire crews racing toward the crash site in Stepney found wreckage still burning, the ground littered with German equipment, documents, and the remains of 1 crew member who'd failed to evacuate in time. At 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes after Thornton's second kill, Major Whitmore arrived on the rooftop in a staff car driven at reckless speed through blacked-out streets. He climbed the ladder without ceremony, his service revolver still in its holster. He'd clearly left from somewhere official, possibly the operations room at Anti-Aircraft Command Headquarters. Sergeant Thornton, his voice carried across the rooftop. Thornton turned from his gun position. Sir. Whitmore stopped 3 paces away, breathing hard from the climb. His eyes moved from Thornton to the improvised predictor device, still mounted and connected to the gun, no longer concealed. Lieutenant Reeves radioed that you disobeyed direct orders, used unauthorized equipment, and shot down 2 enemy bombers. Yes, sir, all of those things are accurate, sir. Do you understand that I could have you court-martialed? Oh, yes, sir. Whitmore walked closer, examining the device. He touched one of the brass gears, traced a cable to the gun's elevation mechanism. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Explain how it works. Thornton walked him through the principles: optical tracking, mechanical calculation, continuous adjustment. He demonstrated the gear ratios, the compensation formulas built into the linkages, the way the device translated observed angular velocity into predicted position. Whitmore listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, his engineer's education evident in the questions he asked about tolerances and calibration. When the explanation finished, Whitmore was silent for perhaps 30 seconds. Then, you built this from scrap. Oh, yes, sir. Without authorization. Oh, yes, sir. And installed it without permission. The major said to keep it, sir. I interpreted that as permission to maintain it in operational readiness. Whitmore almost smiled, almost. That's not what I meant, Sergeant, and you know it. Oh, yes, sir. Another pause. Whitmore looked east, toward the fires still burning in the docks, then back to Thornton. The manual says to wait until 8,000 feet. The manual's wrong, sir. The manual was written by very intelligent people with extensive education. I don't doubt that, sir, but I'd wager they never had to shoot at something moving faster than a Sopwith camel. This time Whitmore did smile, brief and tight. How many shells do you need to replicate this device? The question caught Thornton off guard. Sir, if I wanted every 3.7-inch battery in London equipped with your predictor, how many could you build and how quickly? Thornton's mind raced. I'd need machine shop access, materials and time, sir. Maybe 20 units in 2 weeks if I had help, 40 units in a month. You'll have whatever you need. As of now, you're detached from regular duties. Your only assignment is to build these devices and train gun crews to use them. Lieutenant Reeves will handle battery command. You'll report directly to me. Whitmore turned to leave, then stopped. And Sergeant, next time you discover that official doctrine is catastrophically wrong, tell me before you prove it in combat. That's an order. Oh, yes, sir. Whitmore descended the ladder. His staff car disappeared into the darkness. Lieutenant Reeves approached, his earlier disapproval replaced by something more complicated, respect mixed with embarrassment. I should have listened to you. You followed orders, sir. That's what lieutenants do. And sergeants disobey them. Only when people's lives depend on it, sir. Reeves extended his hand. Thornton shook it. By dawn on September 8th, Thornton's device and the previous night's engagement had become the subject of intense analysis at Anti-Aircraft Command Headquarters. Major Whitmore presented a detailed report to Brigadier General Sir Frederick Pyle, commanding officer of Anti-Aircraft Command. The report included technical diagrams of Thornton's predictor, ballistic calculations demonstrating its accuracy advantages, cost analysis showing material requirements, and training timelines for widespread implementation. General Pyle, a career artillery officer with a reputation for practical thinking, recognized the implications immediately. The standard kerosene predictor cost £850 per unit, required a 3-man team, and produced firing solutions too slowly for modern aircraft. Thornton's device cost approximately £15 in materials, required 1 trained operator, and calculated solutions in real time. The performance metrics were incomparable. Why hasn't this been developed before? Pyle asked, reading the report. Because it violates established doctrine, sir, Whitmore replied. Officially, this device doesn't exist. Officially, Sergeant Thornton should be court-martialed for using unauthorized equipment. Officially is a word that ends wars poorly, Pyle said. Unofficially, how soon can we equip every battery in London? 6 weeks for complete deployment if we prioritize manufacturing. Do it and promote Sergeant Thornton to warrant officer. If he's going to train gun crews, he'll need the authority to tell officers they're wrong. Thornton learned of his promotion at 14. 30 that afternoon when Major Whitmore returned to the battery with a set of warrant officer rank insignia and orders reassigning him to Anti-Aircraft Command's training section. Cooper, Jenkins, and O'Malley congratulated him with the mixture of pride and regret common to small units losing a respected leader. "You'll come back and visit?" Cooper asked. "Who else would tolerate O'Malley's complaining?" Thornton replied. By September 10th, Thornton was established in a workshop at the Royal Arsenal, Woolwich, with 12 civilian machinists, 3 engineers borrowed from Vickers, and unlimited access to materials. The War Office had classified the project most secret, designating Thornton's predictor the Type T fire control calculator in official documents, though gun crews would eventually call it simply Thornton's box. Manufacturing began immediately. The first production unit was completed on September 12th and installed on a battery in Battersea. The second went to Westminster, the third to Shoreditch. By September 20th, 17 batteries across London had been equipped and crews trained. By October 1st, 43 batteries. By October 15th, 89 batteries, nearly half of London's anti-aircraft defenses. The results were immediate and measurable. In the 2 weeks following September 7th, batteries equipped with Thornton's predictor achieved a hit rate of 1 enemy aircraft per 450 shells fired, a 66-fold improvement over standard equipment. Luftwaffe bomber losses over London increased dramatically. Night raids became significantly more dangerous for German crews. By mid-October, Luftwaffe bomber formations avoided overflying batteries known to be equipped with the new predictor, a fact discovered through interrogation of captured crew members. One German pilot shot down on October 3rd and interviewed by RAF intelligence provided particularly valuable testimony. "We were told the British anti-aircraft fire was harmless at night, that we could fly straight and level without danger. Then on September 7th something changed. Their fire became accurate. They were hitting aircraft at high altitude in darkness with single shells. We thought perhaps they had radar-guided guns, some new technology. It was terrifying." The pilot had been shot down by the 127th Battery, by Thornton's original crew, using Thornton's original device. The widespread deployment of Thornton's predictor forced both British doctrine and Luftwaffe tactics to evolve rapidly. Anti-Aircraft Command revised firing procedures, abandoning the 8,000-foot rule in favor of engaging at maximum effective range. Gun crews learned to track aircraft continuously rather than waiting for predictor solutions, maintaining contact throughout the engagement sequence. The Luftwaffe adapted as well. By late October, German bombers approached London at higher altitudes, 16 to 18,000 feet beyond the effective ceiling of lighter anti-aircraft guns. They varied their approach patterns, avoiding straight-line courses, climbing and descending irregularly. They deployed radar countermeasures, strips of aluminum foil called Dupel by the Germans, later known as window to the British, designed to confuse ground-based detection. Thornton anticipated each adaptation. His predictor design was revised 3 times between September and December 1940, incorporating improvements suggested by operational crews. Version 2 included a simple mechanical computer that estimated altitude based on engine sound frequency, useful when visual tracking was impossible due to cloud cover. Version 3 added a system for calculating lead distance against evasively maneuvering targets, using probability algorithms to predict likely direction changes. Each revision was field-tested by the 127th Battery, still commanded by Lieutenant Reeves, still crewed by Jenkins, O'Malley, and Cooper. They had become essentially Thornton's experimental unit, testing new modifications under combat conditions before widespread deployment. It was dangerous work. It was also important work, and the crew took pride in their role. By November 1940, the 127th Battery had achieved 19 confirmed kills and 14 probable, the highest score of any anti-aircraft battery in Britain. Luftwaffe intelligence identified them by their position and began routing raids around their coverage area. The British responded by occasionally moving the battery to different locations, creating the impression that multiple batteries were achieving similar success. The psychological effect was significant. German bomber crews developed a deep respect, bordering on fear, of British anti-aircraft fire. Raid planning became more conservative, with formations approaching at maximum altitude and minimum time over target. Bombing accuracy decreased as crews prioritized speed and evasion over careful targeting. The transition from precision strikes to area bombing was partly influenced by the increased lethality of ground-based defenses. In December 1940, Warrant Officer William Thornton was awarded the Military Medal for Distinguished Conduct in the Field. The citation was carefully worded to avoid mentioning the improvised nature of his device or the fact that he disobeyed direct orders. For exceptional skill and initiative in developing improved fire control techniques under combat conditions, resulting in significantly increased effectiveness of anti-aircraft defenses during the Battle of Britain. The award ceremony was held at Buckingham Palace. King George VI personally pinned the medal to Thornton's uniform and asked about the technical principles behind his predictor. Thornton explained the basics: mechanical calculation, continuous tracking, predictive geometry. The king listened attentively, then said, "I'm told you built the first one from clock parts." "Yes, your majesty, clock parts and a bicycle chain. And now it's saving lives across London." "The gun crews are saving lives, your majesty. I just gave them better tools." The king smiled. "That's what good sergeants do, isn't it? Give their men better tools and trust them to use them well." "Oh yes, your majesty." After the ceremony, Thornton returned to Woolwich, to the workshop where production of Type T predictors continued around the clock. The awards and recognition were gratifying, but the work remained urgent. The Blitz would continue through May 1941, with London enduring 76 consecutive nights of bombing. Every predictor deployed meant more enemy aircraft at risk, more civilian lives protected, more pressure on Luftwaffe operations. Not all consequences were measured in statistics and kill ratios. The increased lethality of British anti-aircraft defenses had human costs on both sides, a fact Thornton understood intellectually, but experienced viscerally on October 27 when he visited a crash site in Hackney. The Heinkel had been shot down by a battery in Islington using one of his predictors. The aircraft had broken apart at 9,000 feet, scattering debris across 3 streets. Most of the crew had died on impact. The navigator, a 23-year-old Oberjefreighter named Klaus Hartmann, had survived the crash but died before medical assistance arrived. Thornton stood in the wreckage while intelligence officers photographed documents and equipment. Someone had covered Hartmann's body with a tarpaulin, but his navigation case lay open nearby, papers scattered by wind. Among them was a letter half-written addressed to someone named Greta. The handwriting was neat, the German script elegant. An intelligence officer noticed Thornton's attention. "Love letter," he said in English. He was writing it before the mission, never finished it. Thornton didn't touch the letter. He'd killed men before. September 7th had started something that continued through autumn, but this was the first time he'd seen the evidence up close. The leather jacket with the Luftwaffe eagle, the wedding ring on the covered hand, the unfinished letter to Greta. "Regrets?" the intelligence officer asked. "No," Thornton said, "but recognition. He was doing his job, I'm doing mine. Only one of us could survive that calculation." "That's war. That's mathematics." Thornton walked back to his staff car. He didn't think about Klaus Hartmann often afterward. War didn't allow such luxuries, but when he did, it was with the acknowledgement that every tactical improvement, every efficiency gained, every successful intercept had a human cost measured on both sides of the channel. The predictor saved British lives by ending German ones. That was its purpose. That was war's arithmetic. By January 1941, Thornton's predictor had been deployed to anti-aircraft batteries across Britain. Not just London, but Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow, Cardiff. The Royal Navy expressed interest in adapting the design for ship-based anti-aircraft systems. The RAF wanted versions for forward air defense units. The War Office debated whether to share the technology with Allied forces or maintain it as a classified British advantage. The debate was resolved in March 1941, when Luftwaffe intelligence obtained detailed information about the Type T predictor through unknown means, possibly captured equipment, possibly interrogation of British prisoners, possibly espionage. A German technical report, intercepted by British codebreakers at Bletchley Park, described the device in accurate detail and recommended development of similar systems for German anti-aircraft batteries. "So much for secrecy," Major Whitmore said when he showed Thornton the decrypted report. "The Germans know all about your bicycle chain." "Then we'll need to develop something better," Thornton replied. He did. Version 4 of the predictor, completed in May 1941, incorporated primitive electronic components, vacuum tubes and resistors, that allowed for more complex calculations, including automatic compensation for shell drift at extreme range. It was the first hybrid mechanical-electronic fire control system deployed by any military force, a direct ancestor of the electronic gun directors that would dominate post-war air defense systems. But even as the technology evolved, The fundamental insight remained Thornton's original observation. That institutional doctrine often lagged behind battlefield reality, that innovation frequently came from unexpected sources, and that the most effective weapons weren't always the most complicated. On May 10, 1941, the Luftwaffe conducted its final major raid on London, a massive attack involving over 500 aircraft. It was the heaviest raid of the entire Blitz, intended as a demonstration of German air power before resources were redirected to Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Anti-aircraft batteries across London engaged with everything available. The sky was a storm of tracers, shell bursts, and searchlight beams. Fighters from multiple squadrons intercepted at altitude. The raid lasted 7 hours and killed 1,436 people, the highest single-night casualty count of the Blitz. But Luftwaffe losses were also severe. 33 bombers were confirmed destroyed, with another 47 damaged. Anti-aircraft fire accounted for 19 of those kills, the highest proportion of any raid during the entire campaign. Batteries equipped with Thornton's predictor were responsible for 14 of the 19. The 127th Battery, positioned that night on a rooftop in Bermondsey, shot down 3 aircraft, a Heinkel, a Junkers Ju-88, and a Dornier Du-17. Lieutenant Reeves, now a captain and battery commander, personally operated Thornton's original predictor for the 3rd kill, his earlier skepticism completely erased by 9 months of combat experience. After the raid, as dawn light revealed the extent of the damage, Westminster Abbey burning, the House of Commons destroyed, entire streets reduced to rubble, Reeves stood beside his gun and thought about that night in September when Thornton had disobeyed orders and proved that expertise didn't always require formal credentials. "We should name the gun," Cooper suggested, cleaning soot from the barrel. "Something appropriate." "Like what?" O'Malley asked. "Billy's clock," Jenkins said, "because it always knows what time it is." They painted the name on the gun shield that afternoon, Billy's Clock Est, Sept. 7, 1940. Thornton remained with Anti-Aircraft Command through the end of the war, continuing to develop improved fire control systems. He was commissioned as a lieutenant in 1942, promoted to captain in 1943, and ended the war as a major commanding the research section of Anti-Aircraft Command. He never returned to clock repair. After demobilization in 1946, he accepted a position with Ferranti, an electronics company developing early radar systems. His work on mechanical electronic hybrid computing systems informed the development of Britain's first computer-controlled air defense network, the forerunner of systems that would guide missiles during the Cold War. He retired in 1968 at age 56, after 29 years of military and defense industry service. By then, anti-aircraft guns had been largely superseded by surface-to-air missiles. Fire control had migrated from mechanical devices to digital computers, and the principles he'd pioneered on a London rooftop in 1940 had been incorporated into systems so advanced that the original Type T predictor looked like a child's toy by comparison. But the insight remained valid. Observe carefully, calculate accurately, trust mathematics over doctrine. In September 1980, 40 years after that night when Thornton shot down 2 bombers with 2 shells, the surviving members of the 127th Heavy Anti-Aircraft Battery held a reunion at the Imperial War Museum. 13 veterans attended. They stood before a display case containing the original Type T predictor donated to the museum in 1965. The brass gears were tarnished now, the optical sight scratched, but the device remained mechanically sound. A small placard explained its significance. 6,000%, O'Malley said, reading the placard. "That's a hell of an improvement." "It's also a hell of an exaggeration," Thornton replied. "Statistics always simplify." "But you did improve things," Cooper said, "saved lives." "We all saved lives, I just built the tool, you lot used it." Jenkins, who'd become a schoolteacher after the war, gestured at the device. "Do you ever regret not staying in Liverpool, not just fixing clocks?" Thornton considered the question. "I fixed clocks," he said finally, "just a different sort of clock, one that told time in shell trajectories instead of seconds." They laughed, the easy laughter of old comrades who'd survived something difficult together. Later, over beer in the museum cafe, conversation turned to the night of September 7th. Cooper, slightly drunk, asked the question they'd all wondered about at various points. "Billy, when you pulled that first trigger, disobeying orders, risking court-martial, were you scared?" Terrified, Thornton admitted. Not of the court-martial, of missing, of everyone being right about my device being junk, of people dying because I was wrong. But you weren't wrong. No, but I could have been. That's the thing about innovation under pressure. You never really know until you test it with consequences. Reeves, who'd risen to brigadier before retirement, raised his glass. To Sergeant Thornton, who taught us that sometimes the manual's wrong and the clock repairman's right. They drank to that. Modern historians debate Thornton's precise impact on the Battle of Britain's outcome. Some argue that improved anti-aircraft defenses were marginally significant compared to RAF Fighter Command's daytime victories. Others contend that night bombing posed the greater strategic threat, and that Thornton's predictor was instrumental in making those raids unsustainably costly for the Luftwaffe. The data supports the latter interpretation. Luftwaffe night bomber losses increased from 1.2% per mission in August 1940 to 4.7% per mission by November 1940, an increase directly correlated with the deployment of Type T predictors. At 4.7% loss rates, sustained night bombing campaigns became operationally impossible. Bomber groups would be destroyed through attrition within 20 missions. German strategic planning documents captured after the war explicitly mention British anti-aircraft effectiveness as a factor in the decision to redirect bomber forces from Britain to the Soviet Union in May 1941. While not the primary reason, Operation Barbarossa had been planned regardless. The tactical difficulties of bombing Britain certainly influenced the timing and scope of the redirection. Dr. Martin Pearson, whose 1987 doctoral dissertation, Fire Control Innovation in the Battle of Britain, remains the definitive academic analysis of Thornton's work, concluded, Warrant Officer Thornton did not win the Battle of Britain, but he made losing it considerably more expensive for the Germans, and in warfare, cost calculations determined strategic decisions. The Type T predictor transformed night air defense from ineffective harassment to credible deterrence, and that transformation saved thousands of civilian lives. In 1995, English Heritage installed a blue plaque on the building in East London, where the 127th Battery had been positioned on September 7, 1940. The building, heavily damaged during the Blitz, had been demolished and replaced in the 1960s, but the location remained historically significant. The plaque reads, "On this site, Sergeant William Thornton, 127th Heavy Anti-Aircraft Battery, first used his improvised fire control calculator to shoot down enemy aircraft, 7 September 1940. His innovation helped defend London during the Blitz." Thornton died in 1991 at age 79, 4 years before the plaque was installed. He'd lived quietly in Cheltenham with his wife Margaret, rarely discussing his war service except with fellow veterans. His obituary in the Times focused primarily on his post-war work at Ferranti, mentioning the Type T predictor only briefly. But among the veterans of anti-aircraft command, among the historians who studied the Battle of Britain, among the engineers who developed modern fire control systems, his name carried weight. He'd proven something important, that solutions to technical problems don't always come from laboratories or universities, that observation and calculation can defeat institutional doctrine, and that sometimes the most sophisticated weapon is built from clock parts and a bicycle chain. Stories grow in the telling. By the 1950s, veterans of the Battle of Britain were telling versions of Thornton's story that emphasized drama over accuracy, versions where he single-handedly saved London, where his first shot destroyed 3 aircraft instead of 1, where the king personally decorated him on the battlefield. Thornton found these embellishments annoying. "I shot down 2 aircraft in one night," he'd tell anyone who asked. "Not 3, not 22, that was significant, but it wasn't magic, it was mathematics." But legends don't care about mathematics. Legends care about archetypes, the underestimated craftsman whose practical wisdom defeats educated expertise, the innovator ignored until crisis demands solutions, the common soldier whose ingenuity changes warfare's course. Thornton's story fit that archetype perfectly, which is why it endured beyond the dry technical reports and ballistics tables. School children learned about him in history classes. Military academies studied his case as an example of tactical innovation under pressure. Engineers cited his work when arguing for unconventional approaches to technical problems. The legend obscured the man, as legends do, but perhaps that's appropriate. The man was unremarkable, a clock repairman from Liverpool who joined the army because he had to, who noticed things others missed because observation was his craft, who built something useful because he had the skills and the necessity. The legend was the lesson. That expertise comes in unexpected forms, that solutions emerge from unlikely sources, and that institutional wisdom must always yield to empirical proof. On September 7, 1940 at 11:47 p.m., that lesson was demonstrated with brass gears and a bicycle chain, tested with 28-pound shells, and proven in the burning sky over London. The night of September 7, 1940, is remembered for many reasons. The first mass bombing of London, the beginning of the Blitz, the moment when the air war over Britain shifted from military to civilian targets. But for those who study the technical details of air defense, it's remembered for something more specific. The night when a clock repairman from Liverpool proved that sometimes the best weapon isn't the most expensive or most sophisticated. It's the one that works. And William Thornton's predictor, built from scrap, dismissed by experts, banned by commanders, worked magnificently. No one ever doubted him again.